God-given, and it's also
It's never been
putting the squeeze. They make money on
excessive materialism and militarism. We know full well that racism is still that hound of hell.
Yeah, it's just been there's like no positive spin to this year. And it's gotten to a point where when people ask me how I am, I'm like, I'm not good. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I've been investigating moving out of the country. Like, I started that in like 2017. In 2018, I kind of slowed down a little bit. It was like, oh, we won back Congress. Like, okay. And now I just don't really want to share this country with the 35% of people who are insane. I don't know like how else to describe them. Evil doesn't even cut it. They've literally lost their minds to racism, essentially. Sort of the foundation of everything that they do that just does not make sense. And even if we win back the presidency or the Senate and like we can impeach a bunch of judges, like we still have to live with these people. And I just kind of don't want to. I don't know where I want to keep making movies. I've got 2 movies coming out. I'm going to try and shoot another one, but like, it's just sort of like displacing the stress. I've just taken this really stressful situation and been like, well, if I was making a film, I would still feel stressed. So now I'm just like disguising it and like putting a dress on it and lipstick on it and sitting at the table with me and being like, no, this is totally what I've wanted all my life. But like just sort of shoving it down and being like, it's not normal and it's not okay, but like this is the way to deal with it so that you don't just like don't want to get out of bed in the morning.
I really commend and admire that you were able to do that during this pandemic, because I'm definitely of the opposite end where I'm like, I can't even like put pen to paper anymore.
I have so many friends in that place, and that I totally get it. And maybe not in the same way, but like when my mom passed away, which was like not expected, she was only 55. It was like really not like supposed to happen, or her time. Like I didn't write for like a year because I just couldn't I couldn't even put my brain, I couldn't even like pinpoint like, oh, well, this is the reason. Like you're just, because it wasn't even just like grief, but it was also sort of like, no one's going to read this. I mean, it was like depression, and it was like so many things sort of like compounded it and made it bad. And I didn't do anything for like a year. And nothing really, I can't say, oh, this is the thing that like snapped me out of it or brought me out of it either. I just sort of got bored of doing nothing. So I get the sort of like feeling that inability to do something productive. And there's nothing you can really say. There's nothing to like jumpstart someone or like trick you into doing it.
Do you think hustle culture pressures a lot of people, especially artists and writers, to produce work even when there is a literal plague upon us?
Sure. And like this goes back to, because I've been talking to a lot of friends about leaving the country. All my friends are in film or theater, and talking about sort of like the things that we've been gaslight to accept as okay in this country. Like my insulin's $420 a month. That's okay. And, and it's $4 in Norway with an asterisk next to it saying the cost is not actually passed on to the patient. I mean, like, things like we're somehow okay. And people will be like, well, no, I'm not okay with school shootings, but you are, like, just because you don't really do anything about it and you could vote or like whatever. Yeah, vote. But like, just we've accepted a level of insanity that many places in the rest of the world just rejected so long ago. And one of the things that we've gaslit ourselves into believing is that artists should be punished. That like, because you like doing it, you shouldn't make money at it or be able to survive, because that would be not fair to the people who do jobs they don't want to do. This sort of under this belief that like, oh, you want to be an actor? Well, then you get nothing. You want to be a screenwriter? Well, then that's a side hustle while you do something else until you make it. And then, but that somehow is like some kind of meritocracy. Like, oh, only the good will make it. No, it's the people who like have trust funds make it. The people who are not pressured to succeed, and the whole starving artist thing is such a myth. And you look at other countries and it's like, there's countries that have like film boards that like fund people's training so that they become filmmakers or they become artisans in the thing that they've desired. And to a degree, they're supported. Even if the country doesn't just pay you full time to be the thing you want, at least the job you do have has a minimum wage that is livable, and you don't have to worry about health. You don't have student debt. And my whole fascination with Norway came because they're like usually top 3 on the happiness index. And I was like, how? Like they have winters that are got to be nightmares. They don't see the sun for like 3 months out of the year. Like how could they really be that pleased with themselves? You know, and you start looking at their culture and you start looking at the legislation they have. You start looking at how they've created a society in which they care about what happens to their neighbors and to each other. And then you get it. They like don't pay for college. They like don't have bankruptcy because of health problems or loans and just crazy things like, and I could be, you know, someone might comment and be like, that's not entirely right. Well, you know, I'm not an expert on Norway. I've just been like poking around websites and reading things, but like, you know, they have programs where if you're like a first time home buyer, you don't have to put any money down because they want you to own a house. They want you to, you know, and there's like no property taxes.
It's as if they want their citizens to thrive and live.
Yes, it's almost like they give a shit about the quality of life everyone enjoys. And then you look at your own country and it's like suddenly looking into a mirror and realizing you're a monster.
I completely agree with that. And I'm also in the same vein, like because I studied abroad in Denmark, and the reason I did was because at the time they were the happiest country on earth. And weirdly, a weird cycle is happening where I went when the first housing crisis in America, or the first like Great Recession of late happened. And I was like, there has to be like, I just need to know like why are they so happy? Like these, you know, homogenous, like white people, like what's going on there? Like, and you're completely right. It's because they take care of their citizens. They enact policies that allow their citizens to thrive.
Right.
And even when I was there, a lot of Danes were like, you know, what's wrong with America? Like, why won't you guys just get free healthcare?
Yeah. They don't even know how to articulate like what's wrong. Why are you so selfish? Like, why do you hold individualism in such a high regard that you disregard everything else to the point where it's like a cult? Watching people defend billionaires online as if they expect to one day be part of that club, you know, to defend policies that are aimed at making sure people of color cannot vote or like count, but hurting themselves while doing it. And it's just a weird, Chris Rock was, I don't know if you saw this thing where he was like, you know, being asked if progress was being made, you know, like Black Americans making progress. And he sort of like, I'm paraphrasing a lot, obviously, but he like sort of rejected this idea because that implies that they needed to make progress, you know, that they needed to prove that they were people like everyone else. And he was basically like, there hasn't been progress. White people are just less crazy.
Yeah.
You know, like they're just like the homophobia and like all these things that they get so, you know, and I don't know if it's because our country was founded by a bunch of religious fanatics that the rest of Europe kicked out. You know, I mean, like, where do you, at some point, how do you trace back and be like, what's the fundamental, you know, is like Puritanism, is Calvinism like our original sin? Like slavery is the original sin. That's, you know, an entire society was built on the backs of other people. And then when it was taken away, their advantage was denied them, you know, and you know, like, and now we still have slavery, like the lettuce we eat and the strawberry, like it, not the same, believe me, I understand that, but it is not humane.
Yeah. And, you know, mass incarceration, we can argue that that is a form of slavery, and how there are, I mean, right now in California, the firefighters fighting these fire tornadoes, I don't even know what to think anymore. Just this country's burning.
Right. Yeah. And basically the country can't survive without forms of slavery, but the country could survive. It's just that the people who have power don't like that different model.
Right.
They don't like it. It takes away from their specialness. Their ego,
their comfort, their power. It takes away power and takes away, I mean, maybe they think there is some sort of karma coming their way, and
I guess
there has to be that.
Sure, but again, it goes back to like they've been just led to believe in this cult that like what they're doing is okay because it's been okay. this is America. You like come up from nothing and you own, you're half the monopoly board, like, and it's just crazy that, this idea that it's like the greatest country in the world, like kind of hasn't been true since like, I don't know,
ever
1947 or something.
You're like 19. I'm like, it's never been great, you guys.
Sure. No, I mean, again, like this exactly. But that there is this complete lack of like taxing the wealth, this complete lack of like giving back, this complete lack of trying to make life better for other people. And I guess America's never had it. They just have never had it. Maybe it's come in waves and people have sort of felt that way. And it almost always takes a horrible turn, right? Like prohibition. I'm sure people thought that was like really beneficial to the country, bringing, the spiritual revivalism. Like that was probably really improving the country, like none of these things have, manifest destiny, go west. That did, that didn't improve the country for half the people living out in the West, like it just, there's this sort of like everything's always just been disguised as opportunity.
I love this. This is the perfect introduction to the podcast, actually, because we've been recording, we're live. But Kevin, welcome to Now in Color. And I feel like you're the perfect guest because we have
far from the perfect guest.
Because Now in Color is the podcast that brings those who have been erased from history back to the forefront. And unfortunately, we're both living through a terrible timeline in history, which I'm sure some podcast later, maybe 30 years from now, we'll be talking about.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but today, I'm joined by Kevin T. Morales. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Kevin T. Morales is a writer and director who lives in Brooklyn, New York with his wife and 2 children. He is the co-founder of Futuregraph Entertainment. Originally from Los Angeles, Kevin went to the Athenian School in the San Francisco Bay Area and studied drama, directing, and dramatic writing at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. He worked at the NY Public Theater before founding his own theater company in Northern California. He has been the artistic director of Town Hall Theater and worked in post-production in Hollywood. Since 2008, he has been writing and working in film and TV full-time, and in 2019 shot his second feature film, Generation Rex, written by his daughter, actress Victoria Lee, and this past summer shot his film Shadow Vaults. His next film, No Fucks to Give, is prepping to shoot next year. His son Quentin plays Iverson Roy on the HBO show Succession. Welcome, Kevin.
I forgot I tagged that on because I said something about Victoria and I was like, oh, I should say something about Quentin because, got to balance it out. My wife works in wardrobe, so literally all 4 of us are in the storytelling, film, TV, theater world, and it's incredibly volatile, but we're a stronger family for it.
And I would love to get your insight, but before we get into that, tell me a little bit more about your personal history. So you're from California. What was young Kevin like? Was he always like, I'm going to be a screenwriter one day or a producer?
Young Kevin was a dick.
Did he always think America was fucked up?
No, definitely not. So interestingly enough, or maybe it's not interesting, maybe it's just completely egotistical. On my dad's side of the family, there's definitely like a branch on my dad's side of the family and that's like the Mexican side of my family. There's a branch of that family that didn't immigrate to America. They were just living in Southern California, and then the United States bought it at gunpoint from Mexico. And so they were sort of just like Americans now, although not really, but like at that point, no one really gave a shit about Southern California. They just wanted the Sierras and the gold and Northern California. Southern California was a wasteland with a few Spanish missions and some, ranches and stuff. So my teachers were always disappointed because, being a Morales, they always wanted me to share with my class, like my immigration story. And I was always like, we were here. You all showed up. I don't know what to tell you.
That must have blown their minds.
Yeah.
They were like, people here?
Yeah. And there's definitely plenty of people who've joined my family line from Mexico and that region. But like for the most part, like there was just a really strong line of us who were just already here. And then on my mother's side, they have a very strong, like well-documented family history going all the way back to great, like 12 times, 11 times grandfather, whose name was John Hartman. And he was born outside Philadelphia in 1757 and fought under Washington at Yorktown. And from that line, we can trace all the way down to, you know, my kids. And in the late 1800s, a great grandmother and her husband took the offer of free land in Southern California if you could turn it into farms. They got on a train and moved to, you know, like the San Dimas Valley and started having, you know, orange trees. So my family is very sort of like rooted in Southern California and has been for a long time. Twice in my family, we've had the oldest living person in Los Angeles County and has not translated into me owning massive estates or having any money. So it's not really worth like bragging about too much. My great uncle, who was my great grandmother's brother, Victor Fleming, who directed The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, I'm related to him. We've just been sort of in the Southern California landscape for a really long time. And it wasn't until my grandmother moved to Northern California that there started to be a little bit of a schism. But then my mother and father met in college in Northern California. And so, you know, they were both originally essentially from LA together. And so
this is incredible because I think you're my first guest that has not had that immigrant story of like, you know, I'm a first generation. This is like, you are a true American, so to speak.
Yeah, in a weird way. And of course, like if you look at family lines, of course, like some people have come across, but like if I follow sort of like one line as far as I can, you know, like there's this really strong old America kind of like weird collision. So I do definitely have sort of like, I don't know if it's an interesting perspective, but a different perspective in some ways because of ownership isn't the right word. Like a much stronger sense of like, no, I belong here. Like, because my last name's Morales, like, don't think I like came here illegally or like recently even, you know, like I have family buried in the ground in like Pennsylvania and like, you know, like really old.
Have you ever been told to go home? Has that ever been in your experience?
Not to like my face. I mean, definitely like in high school and college, there was like joking, which at the time, like I would say like didn't really bother me. And I can see how problematic it is now. But sort of that was like, of course, just like kind of like a bonding mechanism. One of my dear friends, and I won't say his name because I don't want him to get in trouble, but we were like, you know, in the dorms, like not fighting really, but like just messing around. And he was like, and this was at NYU, and he was like, no, you didn't understand. Like you're not supposed to get a degree in directing. It's dishwashing, you know? And it was like, but like, I was like, oh, that's good. You know, like, to, you know, like in that weird sort of like, so in a way I wasn't that insecure about it growing up because I didn't have an accent. And anytime, I think a lot of it was like if someone was maybe unsure, but then they started talking to me, it was just sort of like, oh, like, no, this, you know, he's normal. I definitely had a friend in high school, and I'll never forget this, and I won't say her name either because she'll be embarrassed, was complaining about her. It was a boarding school, so there was definitely a type of student there that had like money. And she was complaining about her home's landscapers, basically the Mexicans working in her yard. They made her feel uncomfortable, which could be true. You know what I mean? But she basically called them dirty Mexicans. And I was like, I'm Mexican. And she was like, no, you're not. And I was like, no, but I am. And she was like, no, but you're not, you know, like, but you're not one of those people, you know? And it's like, I can see where you see differences, but like, just so in a lot of ways, I think there was definitely like a baby boomer and older generation would like recognize it, but like kind of my own age group, again, it was like we were raised like don't see color, you know? So I think a lot of us, they didn't really think of me as being like Latino in like you're working in the fields Latino, so that's not really you. You talk like me, you know, and like you go to this school with me. So not you, like, so, and of course now, like, you look back and you go like, that's horrible. Like that was really awful. If, I think I have experienced prejudice for sure, but I think a lot of times it was probably silent and unknown to me. I don't think it was like thrown at me a lot. Occasionally, like if you ran into like other high school kids who didn't know who you are and would just sort of like look at you visually and then just say like spick or wetback or something like that, and like those things didn't really bother me because I was kind of like, you don't even know who I am, and like you're just stretching for an insult.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think it sounds like it's because your family history is so grounded in America that it was just like there was this sense of like, well, I belong here, and like nothing you can say could like really affect me, which is incredible.
And maybe it's just a psychological armor I gave myself to sort of be like, I'm kind of impervious to that. Like that doesn't really affect me. My great grandfather was the president of the Los Angeles Historical Society. I don't really think what you're saying to me hurts. It's just more revealing what you don't know and your own sort of like small mindedness.
Yeah, it sounds like you got like a lot of empowerment because of all of these roots of like almost like your ancestors are backing you up a little bit, if we're going to get to that witchy woo-woo.
A little bit, yeah. And definitely my mom was for sure white and problematic and like was not fond of the Mexican culture and really sort of like didn't really want to participate in it and really wanted to kind of keep me away from it. I think to some degree that was sort of like my mom wasn't a religious person. So seeing the sort of like Catholicism was like, she had an aversion to it and didn't really want me to like be around it. And my parents got divorced when I was pretty young, and she was very willing to not share me with that side of the family. But definitely looking back, you're kind of like, oh, but also that just, you were like uncomfortable with that side of the family. Like that was a kind of prejudice, and like she was very intent on raising me like in the right neighborhoods and, and all those things. And maybe there was like a concern that I would be perceived the way her husband had been perceived sometimes as like Mexican. Like it was definitely like a dirty word, you know?
Was there ever a moment in time where you were like, I want to be more deliberate about my heritage or intentional about like owning up to that side of it of like, I am Mexican and like all of that?
I guess to confess my absolute cowardice, I really didn't like lean into it at all until it was okay, which was like not until sort of like recently. It started a little bit in college thanks to a conversation. Well, actually, I guess that was before college, but it didn't resonate until I got to college. I was lucky enough to have a brief conversation with, not brief, it was a long conversation. It was a brief time. I was lucky enough to have a long conversation with Francis Ford Coppola when I was in high school. And I was interested in directing and studying film. And a cousin of mine was like, I'm going to hook you up here. And, and I went to his winery in Napa and got to talk to him when I was a junior. And he was adamant against going to film school, which I found somewhat hypocritical, as he was like the poster child for UCLA film. And at the time he was like, don't go to film school. Like, it's just going to turn you into a technician and you need to have life experience if you want to be a filmmaker. And he was like, and at the time I was planning to go to USC. I had like legacy at USC. It was like no brainer. And he was like, you need to go to New York. Like, you need to live in New York. You need to live somewhere else where it's like hard and you don't like know like necessarily how things go. And he was like, and you need to study something other than film, and you need to know how to tell a story. Like, if you go to film school, you're going to know how to light a scene and it's going to be soulless. And at the time I was like, I don't know, man. Like, you kind of just sound angry and old. Yeah, I like this is the dick Kevin Rouse I'm telling you about.
Fucking
like
Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and I think the only movies I'd really seen was I'd seen like Godfather 1 and 2, which were like, great movies, but I didn't have the appreciation I should have. But I really loved Dracula. So I was excited to meet him. And he was just very like on his soapbox and talking to me and asking me these questions. And I didn't really get it at the time. But I think maybe what was in my favor was because I didn't have like a really crazy reverence for him. I just talked to him. I was just honest with my reactions and my feelings. I didn't tell him what I think he wanted to hear. Like I wasn't trying to get anything from him. You know what I mean? Like I had no like agenda other than like, oh, my cousin set this up. Like, this is cool. You've got the helicopter from Apocalypse Now in your pond. Like, that's awesome. Like, I don't know. What do you think I should do, Mr. Coppola? You know, and he was like, don't go to film school. And I was like, okay, but that's not what I want to hear. You know? And so
crazy old man. What do you know?
Yeah, like, but yeah, you know, and of course, and also for your listeners who can't tell that I'm not young, going to film school was like the only way you could learn to make films, because film schools had cameras and film schools would give you film stock. Like there was no phone in your pocket. There was like no YouTube to just show you how to make films. Like you went to film school, but he was like, study art history, study English, anything. And so I sort of half took his advice, which was like, okay, I'll go to New York. I'm like not gonna study directing. I did sort of like get into, because one of the things was he was like he was big on like theater, not himself doing theater, but like just the sort of like the roots of storytelling and working with actors. And so I took that advice. But one of the things he was trying to get me to understand was being a filmmaker that's personal, knowing what you want to tell stories about and like why, and them coming from you, and not just trying to make movies because they're cool. He didn't make The Godfather because he thought it was cool. He didn't make Dracula because he thought it was cool. Like he has like a love for an older cinema that wasn't seen anymore, and he was trying to take the next step. And I didn't really get that until I was at college, and I got it only because I was looking at the kids around me and just absolutely baffled by what they were trying to do, which, because Pulp Fiction had come out, almost everyone was just writing movies about hitmen and hookers. And I was like, you're from suburban Ohio. You don't know anything about hitmen or hookers. And maybe you don't need to know about hitmen or hookers to write a movie, but like then you've got to bring something to it. And I just saw kids like taking out credit cards and borrowing money to make student films that were horrible. They were so bad. And they thought like, I'm going to submit this to Sundance. This is going to get me an agent. And I was like, no, you're just like $30,000 in debt because you really wanted to crash a car in Gowanus for your thesis film. And I really had this like, you know, I really had this moment sort of like halfway through where I was like, I'm going to switch to dramatic writing. I'm going to like more fully embrace theater. Like Francis was right. He was right. And then sort of, so when you start asking yourself, okay, so who am I? Then you start looking and you're like, I'm half Mexican, and that's something I've tried not to acknowledge or tried not to make a big deal out of. Even though the school I went to, they're like, you get a scholarship. And like, you know, every time they took pictures of the brochure, it was like me, you know, and some of the black kids and like some of the Asian exchange students. And it was always like, look, like, and I'm not criticizing them, like, good for you. Like, that's, you know, like, but like I was always included as like one of the like Latino kids. And I was like, sure, great. Thank you for the scholarship. You know, like, I'm glad you are giving it to me. And I was sort of like the creative one. I was like the artsy kid. Like I went to school with kids who were like so good at like science and math. And like my senior project, I wrote a musical adaptation of The Great Gatsby from Daisy's point of view, called Daisy. Yeah. I mean, like, that's what kind of kid like I was. And, you know, and then like I had all these scholarship offers because I was in the top like 0.001% of Hispanic SAT takers, which like you kind of feel guilty about because you're like, I'm not necessarily as underprivileged as some people actually are. I mean, I had a single mother. We didn't have a lot of money. Like, we were living in the worst house in the most expensive town in the Bay Area. But like, what, I'm going to turn down like that scholarship? Like, no, and I had friends who were sort of like, how can you take like money as like a Hispanic student? And I was like, well, I am technically, like, I don't know, like, so I always tried to like kind of like not make a big deal out of it because it seemed to be sort of embarrassing. And so, but leaning into it or embracing it became more about like, well, who am I? Like, what kind of storyteller am I going to be? What kind of stories am I able to tell? And it takes years to answer that question, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a lifelong journey.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. And because you yourself are not a static thing. So it really wasn't until like sort of later that I was like, okay, like I'm going to lean into this, but I didn't want to like create a false impression of it where suddenly, I don't know, I'm like wearing a Mexico soccer jersey and being like, yeah, it's me, Kevin from East LA, like I'm not really from East LA, like my dad was, but like I'm not. So it's hard to navigate because of course now people really are sort of hunting for that and they want that authenticity. And sometimes you feel like a con artist a little bit, like, because you're like, well, I guess I am that, but there's someone who's more that than me. And so then you feel guilty. But then at the same time, I also have had family members who've had so much taken from them, family members who were like moved out of Chavez Ravine so that they could build Dodger Stadium. My dad had little opportunity. He had to essentially join the Air Force. So on some level too, you kind of want to be like, well, you know what? Like if someone wants to give me something to like help boost what I'm trying to do, I'm going to take it because that has not always been afforded.
Yeah.
To someone. So, but it's weird. I mean, it's such a weird line to like try to be like, hey, I'm this thing sometimes, not all the time, like, but like people do sometimes really want things to be black and white.
Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of multiracial folks struggle with is just like, because there's this weird now, touching on your point of like now being authentic and leaning into your culture is like trendy and cool. It's marketable, basically. It's like capitalism doing its thing. Yeah. If we're going to be honest about it. And it's frustrating because I see this too with like a lot of my who are multiracial Asian or whatever. It's just like there's this competition of like who's the most Asian or who's the most whatever, you know? Right. Like how much boba could you drink or just some like things that don't make sense. I'm just like, at the end of the day, it does not matter. Like I personally don't like boba, for example. So I guess I'm not Asian enough. Sure.
I mean, it's so hard, and it's definitely difficult when there's a kind of, there can be a little bit of like a factionalism, and it's very different to be Cuban American versus Puerto Rican American versus Mexican American, versus being from Central America, like there's so much difference, and it's easy to try and get into like kind of like a pissing contest about who has it worse, or like, and I refuse to get into those sort of like debates because it doesn't benefit anyone except to make like try. I guess people want to try and create some sort of hierarchy so they know how to like punch down or like I don't know what it is. Like it's a weird, it's like a weird thing where I don't even know what I'm saying other than I'm gonna stop myself. But it is weird for someone to sort of be like, oh well, your mother was white, so you didn't have it as hard as I did, and it's like, I guess that's true. I don't know. Like I remember the bank repossessing our car because my dad just stopped giving us money. Like I wouldn't say my life was easier. She had never had a job and had to go out and get a job, like, but I'm getting here. I am sitting here being like, no, things were really hard for me, but like, that's not what I want to do. But you do start asking yourself these questions about who you are because you want to channel it positively into the things that you create.
Yeah. Do you think all of this infighting, I would say. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. Do you think it stems from just having things taken away from us and not really having the things that, you know, someone who is white and privileged, like, afforded to them? Do you think it's a form of almost like, okay, well, I've learned from the white metrics of success, so that's why I'm like, well, I have suffered more and like I've, you know, carried myself up by my bootstraps, that sort of mentality? Do you think that's where the competition comes from? Or is it just like we haven't had the time and the space to really discuss even our communities and the different nuances of our communities either? And because we've been painted as monoliths for the most part.
I don't know. There's definitely a part of me that thinks sometimes there's like a defense mechanism of it. Like, I definitely know, I don't think everyone does this for sure. So I hate making like gross generalizations, but I definitely know that sometimes it can be easier to say, I'm not accomplishing what I want to because of exterior forces working against me, than to say, I'm not talented enough. Like, no one wants to say that, right?
Yeah.
That's probably the truth for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Just reading scripts from other people, seeing, you know what I mean? And I've never taken it upon myself to tell anyone who will or won't make it. You really don't know. And taste is completely subjective. But the last thing anyone wants to say is, I'm just not good enough. You know, like, I think people will come up with other reasons why they're not where they wish to be. I think it's detrimental to cry wolf when there is no wolf. But of course, it's so hard to say. You know, it's so hard to say. Like, I can't say if I've gone in to pitch a film and in the back of someone's head, they just were sort of like, I don't know, this Mexican kid who kind of acts like Jack Black, like, he's just not a filmmaker. You know, like, I don't know who, you just don't know what occurs in people's mind. They just like politely pass, you know, but maybe they didn't really even read the script. They just sort of took you in, and everyone does that. That's casting right there. I mean, you literally, I've watched casting directors watch 5 seconds of someone's tape and just go, nope, like, next, you know, and you're like, that's brutal. But like, time is money, you know, I mean, and I think this, you know, talking about like how America gaslights artists, you know, like this punishment of artists, I think that's a little bit of that too, you know, of just, yeah, God, there's so many things. There's so many factors.
Yeah. And especially in a field like entertainment, which is it's a bit wild and all over like, there isn't like a linear path, really. It's up and down. It's goes sideways. Like, maybe you take a sabbatical from it and you think you're never going to come back, and then you come back. So do you have any, I guess I wouldn't say advice, but do you have any sort of thoughts for younger filmmakers who are listening to this, who are filmmakers of color and who feel like there is a lot stacked up against them, especially in entertainment, where the optics of it seems like only white men seem to succeed?
Oh, sure. I feel like there's been memes where people like post like a picture of Matt Damon and Leonardo DiCaprio and Chris Pine. And it's sort of like, look, they all just sort of, you know, they all just sort of look the same, right? You know, and I feel like you can put up pictures of directors and they all have their heavy black frame glasses and their blazer with a t-shirt or what, like, there's definitely like, and I don't know if they're doing it on purpose, like they're trying to fit the type or if that's really a type. And I think I wish I had been shown, I think if I had come along a little later, I would have really, and I mean, I kind of do this now, so I don't know why I'm acting like but I wasn't necessarily young, but like I look at Guillermo del Toro and like Alfonso Cuarón, and I'm like, I wish I had seen those guys when I was younger and been like, oh no, it's okay. Like, you don't have to. I don't even want to call out a specific director, but like, I think even meeting Francis, he just was older. Do you know what I mean? He was just so mature. I didn't see myself in him. And maybe if I had seen him in the 60s, it was always sort of great to see, Scorsese speak in person, because I actually could sort of see myself as like, I'm like him. I'm like overly enthusiastic and small. You know what I mean? Like you really look for the person who sort of could emulate, like that you could say, look, because that person is not terribly attractive, or that person is like this type, but they're doing it. Like, it gives me the confidence to say like, okay, like I'm not like really thin, like white guy with glasses, and a mock turtleneck and a blazer, like $900 jeans. Like, is that like what a director like really is? I mean, of course, directors are so behind the scenes and you don't see them in action, working a lot. Now, obviously with YouTube and behind the scenes, like there's a lot more of that. But like when I was younger, there would be pictures of them in Variety, just you kind of didn't really, it was hard to sort of see yourself. But I remember watching Y Tu Mama Tambien and being like, who is this director? And trying to read everything I could, and then being like, oh man, like I kind of can see myself in this person because of what he's trying to do. He's trying something with the camera. I guess we could argue whether he's succeeding or not, but he's trying to tell a certain type of story. And same with Del Toro, two very different filmmakers, but sort of like committed to themselves. And I guess it's important to say to a young filmmaker, like, yes, you want to make it, and yes, you want to write your script, and like, but you also have to like go out and live life and figure out like who you are. And that's shitty advice, I guess, because how do you do that? But like, you do it by finding something else to do, or a cause, or like a way to put your energy and effort into something besides just writing a script. Maybe we had this conversation already, and maybe the term isn't very, nice to use, but I also feel like filmmakers need to think like colonists. Like, they need to think like pioneers. One of the things I try to tell people is there's sort of like, there's like two ways into the industry. One, being at court, and two, being in the colonies. And you can play at being at court if you live in LA, and you can become an assistant, and you can work your way up, and you can sort of please the people in power and make yourself useful. And that's being at court, right? But if you are not at court, you're in the colonies. And the only way to prove yourself of worth is to make something and bring it back to the people at court and be like, look what I made. Can I sell it to you? And you sell it for more than you made it for. Whatever that means. Time, energy, resources, money. So I try to tell every filmmaker should sort of think like a colonist, being like, what can I make out here in the world? Who can I lead? Who can I gather their energies and efforts, and what can I make that is something that they can't make themselves at court? Because I think that's the mistake I see a lot of people outside of LA who are like, I'm making my first film, or I'm, doing something, but they're just trying to do something that LA already does. Right. But LA does it better. Because LA, money. Because they have studios and they have Brad Pitt or like whatever. So if you're out in the colonies making a film, you have to make something that LA couldn't make. Yeah. And that's where I see Lulu Wang, right?
Oh, love Lulu. I dance. If Lulu ever listens to this, I danced next to her once, and I was like, I want to say hi, but I don't want to be weird, so I'm just going to keep dancing.
I don't want to be weird. But she like went out and made something that LA couldn't make.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like Barry Jenkins went out and made something that LA couldn't make. Like, you have to make a thing that LA can't make. Otherwise, you're just imitating. You're that kid who wants to make a movie about hitmen and hookers. And like, you're maybe you can stand out. Maybe you're so unique. You have such an fresh perspective on the world that just because you're making a movie about hitmen and hookers. But even Tarantino he was living in LA, but he sort of acted like a colonist. Like he really mined his own. I love comic books. I love exploitation movies from the 70s. He found his identity. We can talk about his whatever if you decide he's problematic or not. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm just saying like Del Toro knows what he wants to make movies about. He wants to make monster movies. Mm-hmm. And I was like so saddened by the pushback on The Shape of Water.
Oh, yeah. I didn't really hear about that. I thought it was great.
No, but there was a lot of people who were like, Fishman's best picture. Like she has sex with the Fishman. I mean, and to hear that, and it's like, maybe if you're Mexican American, like it's insulting because it's like, that's not what it's about. Mm-hmm. That's not what it's about. Like he took the creature from the Black Lagoon. He took a thing that we were familiar with and he turned it slightly. He twisted it. He didn't even like make a crazy new thing out of it, but he turned it slightly. And it's about like people being different, kept in cages. Mm-hmm. Do we not see the relevance of this? But for someone to just so easily dismiss it because it doesn't speak to their specific white male filmmaker taste, which I don't criticize like white male filmmaker Christopher Nolan. Like I'm just the first person that came into my head. Like he makes a style of movie. He's very clever. He knows how to use a camera. He knows how to direct actors. He's a great filmmaker. But like that isn't great filmmaking in and of itself.
Right.
That's not the only kind of film. Inception, cool film. Awesome film. Shape of Water, gorgeous, touching, meaningful, but it didn't mean everything to everyone. And it was just, some people just really kind of like shit on it. And it's so, it's so sad. And I think in my email, I was like, I want to talk about like the directors who mean a lot to me right now, which Cuarón, Del Toro, Alejandro, like, they've won, what was it, like 5 of the best directing Oscars in like the last 6 years.
Which is incredible. And I'm so glad you're bringing them to this podcast.
And I guess like, your podcast is supposed to be about history, and this is not, long ago history. But I feel like there's an aspect of Hollywood that sort of wants to say, no, but they're not the others. They're like us. And I want to be like, they're not like you. You just accept them. Yeah. Like I was accepted, by the kids I went to school with, and you know what I mean? And like, there's this sort of, Oscars so white controversy, which is valid, 100% valid. And the fact that these Mexican directors are influencing cinema in amazing ways, but sort of no one wants to like bring up the Mexican part.
Yeah, that's true. And why do you think that is?
It's because I think they want to like just be like, oh no, but they're great filmmakers. They transcend being Mexican. Yeah. And like that's kind of whitewashing.
Yeah, it totally is. And I would be curious to know, and maybe you already know this, of what was it like for them to break into the industry? How did they get their start? I know they're 3 separate people, and we're kind of doing them a disservice by being like, let's lump these 3 Mexican directors together. But
it was hard. It was hard. For sure. It's hard for everyone. It's especially hard to come from another country. And I definitely know some people who would be like, oh, but they were successful in their countries. Being successful in Mexican television that's not an entry into Hollywood. It's really not, like that is not an entry. And they took on enormous risk wanting to make cinema that the world would see. And for the world to see the cinema, it comes from America. Yeah. I mean, that's the truth. Yes, you could be a French filmmaker and make a French film that that everyone sees in France, and you can be well respected. And I'm not saying that's not worthy, but like to make cinema on a global stage, it's got to come through America somehow, some way. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying it's the reality. Mm-hmm. So for them to come to America and be willing to make, like, Del Toro directed Mimic, you know, Cuarón directed like The Little Princess. I mean, they took jobs doing commercial films and still brought themselves to it and kept an integrity that was undeniable. And I think what's important is that they had each other. And I think that's the other sort of lesson in the, like, filmmakers should feel like colonists, is because colonists stick together. Colonists make colonies which have populations. It's not like lone wolf colonist. Like, you have to find the people who are going to make things with you that share your sensibility, that share your taste, that hopefully share your integrity, and not in a screaming, do as I do, it's my vision kind of way, but just like, who are your compatriots? You know, like Coppola had Lucas and Spielberg and Scorsese, and they had each other. And I think that's really important. And I think in Del Toro and Cuarón and Iñárritu, they have each other, and it's powerful.
How did they find each other? I mean, Hollywood is small in its own way.
Oh, well, I mean, Del Toro and Cuarón went to school together. They met in film school. If I'm getting any of these details wrong, I apologize to
Don't worry, every guest is like, oh, I just Wikipedia'd this. Don't worry.
And I think Iñárritu met, I don't remember which one of them, at a film festival, and they just like hit it off. And you could say like, well, of course they probably hit it off. They were the only two Mexicans there, you know, but like, that counts. Like, that counts. Like, that's why you create something, to go to a film festival, to meet your people, to meet the other colonists. They had it hard, and they had to compromise a lot, but they really kept going, and they really kept trying to make the things that they wanted to make. And for me, I talk about this a lot. Like, to me, Roma is the best film that has been made in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. And whether you like it or it's a miracle that film exists. It's a miracle. And Cuarón made tremendous personal sacrifices to make that movie. He took a lot of gravity money and said, I'm going to make a film about an indigenous housekeeper, like the one I grew up with. And the first 4 minutes of the film is going to be her washing dog shit in a driveway. I mean, like, the fact that movie exists is a miracle, because you can't pitch that movie. Like, you can't go and really just ask money for that movie. Like, you can't write a spec screenplay of that and really like expect to get you. Like, you have to be a filmmaker who's built himself up or herself a ladder, a platform to sort of say, yes, I directed a Harry Potter movie, and yes, a big sci-fi Children of Men, and yes, Gravity, but now I'm going to make a movie about my housekeeper. It's going to be in black and white. It's going to be in Spanish. We're going to shoot it in Mexico. I mean, just like, you know, and he doubted himself so much through it all. And it's an incredibly, I guess someone will probably fight with me about it, but like, it's an incredibly selfless film to say, I'm going to make a film about how my family fell apart, and I'm going to make the primary character the housekeeper. You know, it's like, what if the most important person in the family is not related to any of you?
Yeah.
You know, like, that was sort of the question he proposes. And of course, here's going to be a group of people who are like, oh, I don't like subtitles, you know, and I don't like black and white. I don't like, you know, like, I don't get it. And the fact that it did as well as it did, and that movie is a miracle that it exists. And is it a movie you want to watch every week? No, God, no. It's fucking excruciating.
Right.
You know, we're just like talking about like Lulu Wang, right? Like, I'm so fucking pumped for her to get to his place. And hopefully she can. Hopefully people keep giving her enough work you know, that she can build the resume to say, to go to someone like Netflix and be like, so I'm making this film about my housekeeper.
Yeah.
You're going to pay for it. Netflix is like, okay, we don't know.
For sure.
You know, we just want to show, you know, and I was pitching at Netflix, you know, last summer, and the Roma Oscars were in their little display. And I just stood there like, I almost got tears in my eyes, because I was like, this movie's existence is a miracle. How does it get made? Who makes this film? It takes someone with just that much commitment to telling a story. And I know how much he doubted what he was doing, and that he was possibly throwing away his career. You know, that perhaps what he was doing was incredibly selfish, but it's the most selfless biographical film I've ever seen. You know, like the character who is him is like a little kid that you like only see it in periphery, and for him to really to tell the story, to sort of have the backdrop of Mexican politics and unrest and everything that's going on, and for him to sort of put a camera on a tripod and just slowly pan it across a room while a woman does laundry, you know, just like, I'll never make a movie that good.
You might. You never know.
I don't think so. And it hurts me to think that, you know, to know that. And even if I did, I wouldn't know it. Do you know what I mean? I don't think he knows it. I don't think he knows it.
I think every artist is like their own biggest critic of like,
maybe. I definitely need a few who are not.
But do you think they make good art when they're not?
I don't know. I really, in some ways, I try not to. That sounds silly. I try not to judge, because somewhere you could pick any movie on IMDb and that's someone's favorite movie.
That's true.
You know what I mean? It could be like Caddyshack 2, and someone will be like, that's my favorite movie. You know, and I don't know what to tell you. Like, sometimes I have friends who give me shit because I like U2. I like the band U2.
The band U2. I was like, I haven't heard that name
U2.
in so long.
Right, exactly. You know, and sometimes someone will be like, why do you like U2 so much? And I can tell you exactly why I like U2. A babysitter who I was in love with took me to see Rattle and Hum. And seeing how much she was in love with that band made me love the band. And I would listen to U2 music. And guess what? When you listen to something, you create an appreciation for it. There's U2 albums I don't love. There's songs I don't love. But like, if someone's greatest moment is going to the theater with their dad and seeing Caddyshack 2, I'm not going to take that away from them by saying, well, it's a shitty movie.
Yeah, there's just so much personal stories and art. And it's, again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about taste. Like, everyone's taste is so subjective, and it's hard to define what is good taste and what is bad taste.
But I think you got to make something that makes someone feel something. And going back to the movies about hitmen and hookers, is sometimes those movies aren't trying to make anyone feel anything. They're just trying to be cool. They're just trying to be slick. It's like, look what we can do with like stunts and handguns and cars, you know, and I'm not saying because it has those things, the movie's automatically bad. Far from it. Some of my favorite movies have hitmen and hookers, you know, but like,
I mean, John Wick, a great trilogy.
Oh, for sure.
So fun.
Sure. I don't want anyone to listen to this and be like, well, this guy just doesn't like, you know, a good old fashioned American movie or something, because that's not true. But like, there's too much stuff that's just trying to be cool. And that's not a feeling. That's a judgment. You watch it and you're like, that was cool. You know? So
it's interesting you bring these three directors in, and do you see a lot of yourself in them, or do they align with your values? Like, what is it about these three, besides the fact that they're Mexican directors?
I think, obviously that was like the beginning of the appreciation, you know, was to sort of be like, hey, look, these are Mexican filmmakers who are making movies that the world appreciates, not just they show on Univision, or, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's if I share anything with them, which sounds comically arrogant, I think it's just like passion. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard Iñárritu say, "I'm not angry, I'm passionate."
Same.
Talking
I
about something,
identify with that.
Yeah, where you're like, why are you so angry? I'm not angry, I'm passionate. That they care so much that they lose sleep. Mm-hmm. Like, that's definitely me.
Where did you get that? Like, where do you have a moment in time where you were like, this is it. This is my calling. Do you remember that moment, or was it just all of a sudden there?
I don't know. I didn't think of myself as a writer for a really long time, because I went to that school with really smart kids and they made us read really smart books. And if you're, a junior reading Sound and the Fury, you're like, well, I can't write like this, so I must not be a writer. Never mind that you're 17 years old and of course you're not William Faulkner. I didn't start writing until I was working at the New York Public Theater, and they had an open submissions policy for scripts and musicals, and I was assisting the producer for musical theater, and everyone and their dog would submit a musical, and I would read these things, and this sounds horrible because I've been this entire podcast being like, I try not to judge, but then being incredibly judgmental. But I was asked to be judgmental.
It was your job.
You would read something and you would be like, I can't believe this person wrote this and submitted it. Yeah. Like, what makes them think that they can write? And then you sort of are like, I can write better than this, and that's like the gateway drug into writing, is sort of being like, if someone could write that, like, well, I can at least produce something of that quality, so maybe it's a little bit of competitiveness. And then I was directing theater. I was getting really into theater, and I kept trying to find things that didn't exist. And it just was like, well, I'm going to have to write this myself. Yeah. And that's a lot of my work right now. Is it's a thing I want to exist, and I don't know anyone else who's doing it. And I'm sure someone is, and I could probably find it. And I definitely don't aim to direct only things I've written. My film Generation Rex was written by my daughter and her friend because of an idea I had that I didn't want to write because I knew I would not write it well. Mm-hmm. And asking her to write it as a way of sort of being like, I want an authentic teenage voice. I don't want a cynical person who remembers being a teenager and like has real strong opinions about it now. And the idea for that film, I was talking to a producer at Netflix, and oh God, you probably don't even want me to go into the story.
No, you should. Why?
I don't know. I felt like I was suddenly getting really off topic.
Oh no, you should definitely do that because
so
you're also a history maker.
Yeah. So my film Generation Rex is a 90s teen comedy, and it came about having a meeting with a producer at Netflix and talking about, this was 2017, and like every meeting started with, can you believe what Trump did? And for the first 15 minutes of every meeting, it was just like, he's banning Muslim. I mean, everything was just like, what the hell? And I was really having this existential crisis as I was heading into this meeting, because I went to this really super progressive liberal boarding school where we called our teachers by their first names and like lived on campus, and their classrooms were their homes. And I mean, it was very like, it's a great school, fucking love it, but like nutty. Maybe it's not as nutty as it used to be, but it was definitely nutty then. And we had a teacher, and I read that he had me read this book called Generations, The History of America's Future. And it's by these two guys from MIT who created generational theory, which is, if you are unfamiliar, it's not really science, kind of like more astrology, but it's basically the idea that sort of every 80 years, there's like a cycle. There's like an 80-year cycle to history, and every 20 years there's a turning, and that history kind of has seasons: winter, spring, summer, fall. Like there's like 4 seasons in history, and there's 4 types of generations. And your generation is defined by the season you're born in, and it affects your outlook on life and your relationship to the other generations. And it's book is thick and it's dense and it's complicated. And it basically started because they kind of realized like, oh, isn't that funny? World War II was 80 years after the Civil War, which was 80 years after the Revolutionary War, which was 80 years after the Enlightenment. I don't remember. But so they just went backwards and just sort of felt like the same things happen again and again. And they just started breaking it down into these really minute levels. And they came up with this theory that there's like 4 types of generations and there's 4 seasons. And I had to write a paper about generational theory, and my paper had to be titled "The Crisis of 2020."
Oh my God.
And this was the early 90s that I had to write this paper, because 2020 was going to be the next time the crisis comes along. That's the next time winter comes along.
No one can see me, but like my jaw is dropping.
This book is nuts because it predicted everything. Not the actual events, but how we respond to them and how we treat them and what kind of people come into power. And it is crazy. It's crazy. And I went to this Netflix meeting and I was like, I'm sorry, can I just tell you like a really crazy story? And this was 2017. I was like, everything that is happening, this book talks about happening because it happens every 80 years. Right? And I explained the whole thing to him and how this conflict between what are baby boomers and millennials, and like this happens at like blah, 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 like all this thing. And he was like, there's a movie there. And I was like, I mean, is there a movie about astrology? You know, like it's not really a movie. That's not character. That's not conflict. That's not like, it's just kind of a philosophy, like it's an outlook on life. So then we were talking about, well, what could that, because I'm not going to be like, I don't say no, but like, let's explore. I'm curious. You're curious. Let's be curious together. And we were talking about I was Generation X. He was Generation X. And I was talking about how in this book, I know how Generation X acts, and we are acting that way, which was to sort of compromise, to sort of say, I see your point of view, baby boomers, and I see your point of view, millennials, and I think we should all just sort of relax. You know, but it was that mentality that was sort of like, I know Donald Trump's a bad guy, but like Hillary must be bad too. Like it's that equating of things that is troublesome because you need to pick a side. And I was like, Generation X isn't picking a side because Generation X had our parents had the highest divorce rate in the history of humankind. And mommy and daddy would fight, and we were the first generation with headphones, and we'd go put on our headphones and listen to our music and try to kind of avoid conflict because we grew up with it. And so I sort of proposed that maybe the way into a movie about this would be to look at Gen Xers as teenagers and be like, could you see them becoming this group of people who is not totally responsible for this clusterfuck, but definitely not making it better? Because Gen X's was like, we were like the majority of journalists, like not the people really running the papers, not the people owning the media. Like those are baby boomers, you know? Yeah. But there's a whole army of journalists who are sort of in their 40s, you know, like early 50s, and kind of being like, well, you know, everything sucks. Right? That's like the Gen X mantra. Everything sucks. And our generation developed all the apps that bring you food because you don't want to go out. I mean, like we really like are an isolationist generation. It's a nomad generation, as Strauss and Howe would say. And the last time there was a nomad generation was like Hemingway and those people. Like, and we come along every 80 years, like everything else. But as soon as we were talking about this, I was like, God damn it, we're talking about making a 90s coming of age story. And that's the last fucking thing I want to make, because it's going to be about a teenage boy staring at the horizon, smoldering with generic rage, wondering why his dad left him. And like, I've seen that movie, and I don't think I have a fresh take on that movie. Like, I don't want to necessarily make that movie, but I didn't tell him that. And I walked out of it, and I couldn't let it go maybe I couldn't let it go because someone had enthusiasm for something, but also because I was thinking a lot about it. And I'm also Gen X. I love John Hughes films. They're problematic. They're mildly racist. They're definitely sexist. I get it. Like, I know, like I can watch them and know what's wrong with them and still sort of enjoy them. But I thought to myself, well, maybe this is the chance to have the John Hughes film I never got to have, that had a sort of queerness to it, to have a kind of inclusivity to it. And I went to my daughter, who's an actress. She's been in a lot of things, directed by a lot of great people. Spielberg, Soderbergh, Scott Derrickson. She's working. She's great. And I've been trying to get her to write, to have a little more agency in her career. And I was sort of like, how would you like to write a movie about my childhood? Because you're 17. You're actually 17. And I would be interested to see how you frame, not really, it's not biographical by any stretch of the imagination, but to not write about your own generation and your own friends and your own problems, but like a generation before you. In the spring of, let's say, 1994, a month after Kurt Cobain has killed himself, what are these kids dealing with? But make it the film that you would want to see. Victoria, 17-year-old queer girl. And the film that I never got to have, but, you know, and so she roped her friend Bridget into writing it with her. And I was like, we could write it for you guys to be in. Like, they have all these professional actor friends. You know, I was like, we could write it in such a way that we could make it ourselves. But let's see, like, can we give ourselves the thing that we didn't have before? And that's what got me into writing in the first place, was to say, I want a movie about this, and it just kind of doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist the way I want it to exist. And they wrote a script that was 155 pages long, and we did readings and we cast it, and we were able to raise money, and they did a little crowdfund campaign to support it, and we shot it, and we're in post-production, and it's hopefully coming soon. And
Netflix?
Well, I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. Are you on
I don't
NDA?
know. I don't know. But again, it was sort of like that same mentality of like, we're gonna be colonists out here. We're gonna make a thing that we don't see being made, and not in the way that LA could make it. And I've seen Hollywood try to make this film, but it compromises in sort of mainstream ways and cliche ways. And I'm hoping to do sort of my best Cuarón impression of sort of like, I'm channeling how I want to tell this story. I really was like, the camera is going to be a kid at this party. I want the audience to feel like they're a kid at this lake house for the weekend on Memorial Day in 1994. And they just don't really happen to say anything, but they're included, you know, and they're observing, and they're part of it. And it feels frenetic when it needs to feel frenetic. And it's sort of a Breakfast Club-ish kind of story with some kids who are supposed to be thinking about the future, supposed to be thinking about college and these things that they're told matter. They don't believe it, but they can't articulate why. And everything's supposed to be great, but it doesn't feel great. And when you look at Generations, it's because it was fall. It was autumn. Things were starting to get colder. Like, the crisis is coming. The steps, the things coming together that exacerbate it, that cause it to explode, are like forming, but you can't. It's like the shadow from Mordor. Like, you can't see it, but you just feel it in the woods, in the lakes and the leaves. But that's, you know, that's just sort of that's what the film's about, but it's not what it's about. You know, the plot is something different, but this is what I'm hoping permutates what feels like a 90s teen comedy, you know, but there's something that's not fluffy about it.
Do you find that when you do write, or when you do produce a film, do you find that the themes, or what the feeling to be, does that come first, or is it the characters and the plot? And I feel like every writer has their own process, obviously, but what is yours? What drives your writing and storytelling?
I almost come up with a a feeling I want the audience to take away. I think that's the thing that comes to me first. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's what I think the last scene of the film would be. I'm a big proponent of Aristotelian, it sounds so pretentious, of like Aristotelian drama, the idea of action, conflict, and reverse. And that we experience the strongest catharsis when at the end of a play or a movie, you think to yourself, I'm surprised, and yet that was inevitable what happened. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't see that coming, but now that it's come, of course that's what was coming. And that can be a tragic feeling, that can be a joyous feeling. And so I try to fuse that in everything I do. What is the surprising but inevitable? Try to do that at the end of a scene, try to do that at the end of an act, try to do that at the end of the film. So often I come up with how I think the film ends, and then I reverse engineer it. I try to reverse into that ending so that it feels like the thing you didn't see coming, but then it makes total sense.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that I'm getting to hear about Generation Rex and like your process. And I think it's even, I mean, I don't want to shit on these three directors we're going to talk about. I was going to say, I actually feel like this is much more inspiring to listeners than the three directors, right? Well. Because it's so personal and so much of, you know, it feels closer a little bit.
Sure. And I guess in a way I am still talking about them because I feel like caring about them and seeing what they cared about showed me how to care and how to put out what I care about, and not in a copycat way, but in a sort of just constantly asking yourself, why? Why am I putting the camera here? Why is my character walking this way? What are they trying to do? What are the obstacles? What's going to be the result that no one saw but now understand? And I think Birdman is a perfect example of that. Y Tu Mamá También is a perfect example of that. Children of Men is a perfect example of that. Pan's Labyrinth is a perfect example of that. And Roma is an amazing example of that. Oh my God. You know, there's this, I really strongly believe, you know, I see people on Twitter and stuff all the time, like wanting mentors, and we all do. And I've had some great mentors, but you really can find mentors in the people who you can't talk to anymore. Mm-hmm. They're dead. They're not accessible to you. It just requires research. You look at the movie of the director you love, the filmmaker you love, and then go look at the films that they loved, right? Like trace the ancestry of what your favorite filmmaker's doing. What inspired them? What are they watching that's inspiring them? It's all stolen. You know, it's all stolen. And you want to steal from the best, and you want to honor it. You want to kill the thing you love and then make a statue of it and name your favorite sports team from it. Like, I mean, I hate this colonist talk, but that is like, you need to drink the blood of the things that you want to possess, you know, of the powers you want. And yeah, we're not talking literally about, you know, Guillermo, Alfonso, and Alejandro, but like I am, you know, talking about myself. I feel like I'm talking about them, and not because I put myself in their league. I absolutely do not. You have to be responsible for your own education.
Yeah. And I think because of their representation and like, I mean, what they've represented to you and other filmmakers, I think that is in itself very valuable too. Just like the fact that you were able to identify with them in that way.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I started this podcast too, of like, there's so much history that a lot of people of color don't quite know because it has been whitewashed. And then we just think, oh, I guess I just have to be white and like live in that way. But then when you get into the nuances of American history or Western history in general, you're like what you were saying way earlier on in this conversation, I've been here the whole time. My family's been here the whole time.
Totally. And I think if a young filmmaker was listening to this and thinking to themselves, okay, I have to make the thing that only I can make a thing of, but that's a lot like other people's things, then you need to go out there and experience something and become an expert in something or do something that like is not everybody's thing. If you only know the suburbs, I hope you have some really fresh takes on what it's like to be in the suburbs, or you can, if you have other personal trauma, like I'm not saying because you grew up in the suburbs, you have no stories to tell, but it really requires having films are about perspective. You have to have a point of view to make a movie that resonates with people and that makes them feel something. And I would argue that a lot of our experiences where we try not to get dramatic, or we try not to get involved in conflict, or we try to live a quiet, unobtrusive life. You know what I mean? Like, you're not helping yourself. If you want to be a filmmaker, like, you're not helping yourself unless you get involved in something, unless you have a point of view. And I really don't want someone to hear this and be like, fuck you, Kevin, I grew up in the suburbs, I don't have any choice about that, like, I still want to be a filmmaker. Great, but like, what is your take? Like, what is your point of view on the thing that you want to make a movie about? And it has to be different than what someone in LA can do. That's my opinion.
No, I love this. And at what point do you think, so let's just say I'm a young filmmaker listening to this. At what point do I know, not me, but like someone listening, they might be asking themselves like, okay, but at what point do I know like that my perspective is unique enough, or that I've experienced enough? When do you know that that is enough?
I don't think you can know. And that's why you just have to make things and accept the feedback. I think accepting the feedback is crucial, but there is no feedback unless you've made something.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, aspiring artists and young artists I think there is this like paralysis of, it's like, we have so many ideas and all of this, and it's just like all these ideas, but they never get formulated, because I think there is like a fear of failure in a way. And do you think that you have to be okay with that failure and be okay with falling flat on your face? And, maybe are there examples of these three directors where they have failed tremendously and thought, I'm never going to recover from this? Or you as a filmmaker, have you ever had a moment where you're just like, I'm going to quit forever. I'm quitting entertainment. I'm quitting storytelling, and I'm going to become an accountant? I mean, not that there's anything wrong with accounting.
There's nothing wrong with accounting. I think the most challenging thing to do is to reframe failure as education. And it can be so hard because the high of validation from success is so addictive. It's so addictive. I think I'm not going to say one of the worst things that ever happened to me, because that's obviously totally hyperbolic and ridiculous. But something that happened to me early that became a high I kept kind of chasing was I directed a musical in the summer of 2000, Leonard Bernstein's On the Town. And I had a really strong point of view on how I wanted to do it. I brought out a bunch of actors from New York, did it in a very specific way, very untraditional way. And it was one of the best reviewed musicals of the year in the Bay Area, and was named the musical of the year by the San Francisco Chronicle. Like, it just was a runaway like hit success. I chased that high for like 2 years, and I shouldn't have let it mean more than the shows that did not get reviews like that. Mm-hmm. The musicals and plays that we were doing were critically always received pretty well. Some things received better than others, but it wasn't always translating into ticket sales. And I really sort of like took that as like well, people just don't know good stuff when they see it, you know, like, and I became very dependent on the critics liking things because it translated into ticket sales. You know, that review in the San Francisco Chronicle with the little man like jumping up and down clapping, that sold out the show. It sold out the show.
Wow.
You know, and like, so to see that and to be like, how do I replicate that? And then when you don't replicate it, you're like, I failed. Do you know what I mean? Because you set out to replicate that, not to just put on a good show, not to just honor the production that you've chosen to present, you know, like, but to just sort of try to replicate success. Now your agenda is different. You're making choices differently, and now you're probably hurting yourself. And so I think when I went back to filmmaking, I made a short, submitted it to a bunch of film festivals, got into 0 of them. And that was like getting stabbed in the chest. You know, because it's like, oh, but you're so talented, you're so good. Like, what happened? And you're like, I don't know. I failed. It's a failure, you know, but like the process of making that film was really important to how I moved forward, like how I approached everything, because I really had to sort of be like, okay, well, what did I do wrong? And it was in the beginning, there was sort of easy ways of being like, well, I hired the wrong editor. I hired, you know, like it's very easy to like to fault someone else. But at the end of the day, if you're the filmmaker, you take all the credit, you take all the blame. Like that's just how it is, because every choice was yours.
Yeah, you're the captain that sinks with that ship. You said
yes or no to every decision that came along, and you're human. So of course you're going to make bad choices, and hopefully you surround yourself with people who can point out to you. I mean, this is the thing that is if you were to be the most jealous of those 3 filmmakers, the thing that you would be most jealous of is that while Cuarón's in the cut of a film, Guillermo del Toro comes over and like sleeps in the editor's office with you for 4 days while you completely restructure a film. Like, to have someone like that in your corner fighting as hard for you as you would for yourself, like that's the important part about being the colonist, right? Is to find your other colonists. Like Del Toro and Cuarón and Iñárritu showed up in America and like colonized, you know, like
I love that.
Yeah, like you have to, you like they reversed it. They made themselves invaluable, and you have to find the team that is going to back you in that way. And I guess, you know, that thing that we talked about, how you don't want to say like, I don't have the talent. You know what I mean? Like, I think maybe one of the signs that you're maybe not meant to be doing this is you simply can't gather the team.
Right.
If people won't follow you, if people won't do, you know, like they don't see merit in what you've done, then they're the wrong people. Or at some point, the common denominator is you. And that's just self-reflection. The film that I shot this summer in quarantine, I was supposed to shoot a film in May, totally postponed. And I said to myself, I'm not going to let the virus keep me from my plan of making a film this summer. How can I do this? And I went to a lot of the same people who were part of that team. And I said, look, I still want to make a film. There's no money for this new film because there's no money. I can't take money from a different film to make a completely different film that I just started writing in quarantine. But can I send you the script? Would you still be the composer? Would you still be, would you still do the job you were originally going to do on this other film, on this quarantine one, in exchange for points? Like, can we just all own something and be productive during this time? And almost everyone's response was like, well, send me the script. Right. Yeah. Because these are professionals, and I'm not Scorsese, where someone just says, yes, you're Scorsese. I don't even need to see the script. I'm on board. And I had written a script in like 2 weeks. And it was very much like, I'm in the fog of quarantine, but I'm going to write what it's like to be in the fog, and wrote this little script called Shadow Vaults. And I sent it to everyone, and everyone I asked to do their job read the script and said yes.
That's incredible. That's an amazing team to have. That's the dream team.
And maybe it's going to be a crappy film. I don't know. But like, I guess the only thing I can say that gives me confidence that I can do this is because other people are willing to do it with me. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing. That's the only evidence I have, because I can write a scene and I can just, my opinion of that scene can change hourly. Like, sure. I could write that scene and be like, oh man, that's really good. Look at it the next morning and be like, oh, that's really rough. And then come back 2 days later and I'm like, oh, but if I just cut that and move this line, now the scene's really good. Like, I can really ride that roller coaster a lot. So I just choose to I try not to just engage in the roller coaster at all. I just try to make my best choices, and I send it to people that I've learned to trust their feedback. And I have, my own mentor. It's a loose word, but like people who are farther than me, and doing this for money and as their career and have awards for it. And then when possible, I try and like look backwards at the people who are not too far behind me and say, here, maybe this tweet helps you, or maybe this feedback on your script helps you. That's all you can do.
I will say your Twitter, I don't even know how I found you, but that's how we met, was through Twitter.
That's true.
And I'm just like, I feel like my Twitter is just like, I feel bad today. And yours is always like mostly inspiring and like mostly about film in the industry. And that's probably why I started following you too. So
I try. Obviously it's super easy to get like really political and really angry. And I do, although I try to retweet people who are better at it than me, who are articulating something better than I, just being like, I'm fucking pissed. So some people might look at some of my tweets and be like, you're not that political. Like, you don't necessarily, but I do for sure, but I try to minimize it and try to retweet more people who are leaders of Black Lives Matter. Like anyone who actually is dedicated to this thing and understanding it and crushing it. And I want to support them. And I try to keep it about film, or TV, but it's hard.
It's hard.
And I feel like a con artist sometimes, because I'm like, I don't like what right do I have to be telling anyone anything? Like, what have I done? You can also get pretty low in your own self-confidence, and at some point I delete a lot of tweets because I'm like, no one should be listening to me.
I think every person should do that. I recently did a Twitter audit and I was like, whoa, I said crazy things when I was in college. I'm going to delete all of this.
Oh God. Yeah. Thank God I didn't have the tweeters back in
the tweeter in college
when I was younger and far more. Yeah.
Yeah. I am so inspired by your story and your journey in filmmaking. And it sounds like a lot of the values that you've learned over the years is, about uplifting others and about teamwork and collaboration and building colonies, so to speak. As we're wrapping up, is there anything that you want to say to, it doesn't even have to be a young filmmaker or just anyone who's trying to break into this really difficult, really messy industry? Like, how do you stay sane through it all when there's like the Me Too movement and Oscars. So, just a lot of things stack up against you, even more so than in any other industry.
I guess to some degree, I certainly have a desire to make changes and to dissolve a lot of the way things are done. But you have to know why those things exist, because Hollywood wasn't created in a vacuum. It's an organism. It evolves. And I think just as you are an artist, and like the great painters would all go and visit the Vatican and look up at Michelangelo's ceilings, we must also watch the movies that come before ours. And it can be difficult to watch some of those movies because they're misogynistic and they're racist and they're not to our taste. I definitely don't think if something triggers you, don't watch it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not advocating for forcing yourself to watch something, but just as you would do that for your own artistry, to watch the things that came before you, to say, I want to watch a heist. I want to write a heist movie. What are the great heist movies, right? And you go back and you're like, oh, Ocean's 11. That's not that old. I guess it's 20 years old or something. So it doesn't seem like that old to me, right? And then you gotta go backwards, right? And you go to Die Hard, and then you go to The Sting, and then you go to the Pink Panther. You keep going backwards. And I think in the same way, if you really want to make changes in Hollywood, you have to know you should study the history. I only know this because of a series that I had pitched and have in development that takes place in Hollywood in the 30s. I assumed that everyone in the town knew the history of Hollywood, and then was constantly astonished how often I would be pitching to someone who's a major producer with credits, and they didn't know who Irving Thalberg was. And that's okay if you don't know. There's an award they give out with his name on it, and people don't know who built the system or why, but they know they want to undo it, which is great. But it's easier to undo something when you know how it's been built than to sort of just want to smash it all down. And we can say, let's smash it all down, let's burn it all down. Sure. But how do you make sure that the same thing doesn't just get built in its place? How do you make sure the same thing isn't just rebuilt? You have to know where it came from. You have to know why certain unions came into existence, why certain contracts exist, why studios did what they do, and why they do them now. Because at the end of the day, it's about money. You have to follow the money. And if you want to undo things, you have to figure out how the thing they're doing is less profitable than the new thing. And there's no easy answer.
I love this because it runs in parallel with what's happening now with political movements as well. And that's all I'll say about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I feel like more people who want to change Hollywood should actually understand how Hollywood works, and not. Right. And I don't say understand it and endorse it. I mean fundamentally understand it, because I sometimes I see film critics lashing out at something, and part of me, when I can't bring myself. You would fight endless wars on Twitter and stuff, but sometimes I want to write this person and be like, you're acting as if someone just made this movie, that you're lashing out against. This movie started 5 years ago.
Right.
You know what, like people being like, how could this even get made like in this day and age? Because nothing is made in this day and age. Everything was started 2 years ago. You know, like sometimes people don't even understand and they want things to be different and they want things to change, and that's fine. And they should. But not knowing how the industry works, even if you're just a screenwriter, like if you don't know how the Screen Actors Guild works, that will hurt you. Almost inevitably, someone sends me a script. I'm willing to read a script. And in the script is like a 3-year-old that's like in every scene. And I'm like, just so you know, this is impossible to make unless it's a doll or you're CGIing this baby. Because a baby can be on set for like a half hour. That's why they get triplets, you know, or like a toddler can be on set for 2 hours. You know, so you've literally made a movie that's you've written a movie that's impossible to make because you just
that you're bringing this baby up, because I don't know if you're a Twilight fan or have ever been involved in Twilight, but this is relevant because right now Twilight is having a resurgence with Gen Z, since we're talking about generations, and Gen Z is like, why did again, like the same critics, Gen Z is like, what the fuck? Why did they CGI this vampire baby? It looks crazy. And this movie looks crazy. But yeah, they probably ran into, well, we can't have a baby for this entire vampire movie.
Child abuse. There's labor laws, you know, I mean, you know, so it's so funny to watch someone rail against a CGI baby and then also rail against Hollywood for like shitty labor practices. You know, you're like, well, don't complain about this CGI baby. You know, I mean, just like, because like people just not knowing how the machine works. They just see the product that comes out and they can see that only white actors were nominated, which is dumb, you know, like, but understanding why did those white actors get nominated? They don't get nominated in a vacuum. They get promoted by an agency and by marketing teams and by studio, you know, like, it's just, you know, it's so complicated, you know, so sometimes there are these really blunt knee-jerk reactions to things, and people don't know how the industry actually works. And sometimes I want to get on Twitter and be like, that's not how casting works. You know, you're criticizing the wrong thing. The thing you're being critical of is valid. Your criticism is valid, but your lack of understanding of the machine, like, doesn't help you, because you just, you know, you're like, it's like complaining that, like, I can't even think of an analogy. It's like complaining that something is bad for something, but like that's its inherent nature. Like, you know, I don't know what to tell you. Like, cows fart. It's bad for the environment. There shouldn't be too many cows, but like, you shouldn't want to like make cows extinct. You know, it's like that sort of mentality of like, cows should be extinct. It's like, what? No, like, we just need to eat less red meat and not have so many of them. But, you know, but people just don't see how the machine works.
Heard it here first. Cow farts are like Hollywood. That's exactly what's happening in Hollywood.
That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting. This reminds me of a story of when I was in drama school and a casting director. No, it wasn't. It was a acting teacher actually said something like, and it like made so much sense because, you know, I will admit I was one of those people who's just like, Hollywood fucking broken and like Scarlett Johansson's playing Asians and that's fucked up. And someone put into perspective saying like, casting directors, they just want to go home at the end of the day. They just want to get their job done quickly. They're just like you and me. If you're in a 9-to-5, they're just like, I just want to bang this out and go home. And they were probably like, you know what? Scarlett Johansson seems great for this movie. I don't know. Right.
And that even goes back into it where it's like, no casting director is involved in casting Scarlett Johansson. Mm-hmm. Like, no casting director goes, you know, it would be perfect for this, Scarlett Johansson. And they like call her up. Like, so many scripts come across Scarlett Johansson's agent's desk and they just pick the best ones. There's no casting director involved. You know what I mean? Like, no casting director picks someone like Brad Pitt, right? Brad Pitt produces the movie that Brad Pitt is in. Brad Pitt arguably decides who the other people are around him. You know, and because a movie, I'm not like some Scarlett Johansson apologist. My daughter played her niece in a Broadway show and she was a lovely person. But like a script came across her agent's desk. They saw the other things attached. They took the script to her. They were like, they're going to pay you $20 million. It's not a bad script. You should do it. And she just said, okay. Like, and I'm even oversimplifying it. You know what I mean? And then 4 years later for it to result in like some backlash, like, should she have said like, no, this isn't for me? Like, sure, arguably, but not if she didn't know that. Like, if she doesn't know the source material, if no one bothered to educate her, if no one, you know, like, she's got a million things going on, and just like sometimes like the vilification of someone like that also feels a little misogynistic. I like sometimes the person who's picked to be the villain is like often a woman. I don't know. Like there's a lot of factors going in. I promise you agencies are the worst committers of these crimes, more so than the actors, more so than the directors. Like the money people who want to package the thing and make the most money, they're almost always at the end of the when if you follow the chain to who's really responsible for this poor, offensive, racist decision, somewhere at the end of the line is a very powerful producer or an agency.
Yep. As the great Hamilton musical said, follow the money and see where it goes.
That's right. I mean, that's right. So like, actors willingly taking parts for portraying marginalized groups that they shouldn't be. Don't do that. Please try not to do that. But there are some people who are not aware, and no one wants them to be aware because they want them to do the project and get it made and get the packaging fee and like. And so what? Half these people aren't on Twitter listening to the outrage. You know, I mean, they're in their own realities. Yeah,
I could only imagine.
My wife worked with Tom Hanks on a Broadway show. And one of the things he mentioned was the hardest part of his life is keeping his feet in reality because he's surrounded by people who just will say yes, will shield him and protect him, you know what I mean? And like, and if he let it, he could be so completely removed from reality because of his status and his money and his position, and you know, and I think it does happen for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I know I said like, oh, last question, but I have one more question about that in particular is what do young filmmakers or artists do when they do get lost? Because it's easy to, like, even on Instagram, it's like, oh my God, I got 1,000 likes on a photo. Like there is so much clout chasing and so much of that. And how do you ground yourself in reality? Or are you like, no, I'm not there yet, but maybe there are instances where
I feel like my reality is pretty grim, so I don't think I'm too disjointed from it. Like, I have the reality of my bank account. I have the reality of, you know, people reading my material and saying, "No, I don't want to do this." So I definitely don't feel like I'm in a bubble. Probably the thing that has brought me the most out of what was maybe becoming my reality is my daughter, because she's super, I don't want to use the word woke, but like she's young and she's empathetic and she's understanding things that I didn't even know were an issue. Like I'm old and I want to not be old, you know. But the other night we watched Some Like It Hot. She'd never seen it before. And she had massive problems with it because of men dressing as women and being on a train car while they're all dressing and like watching them, you know, and she was like, that's not okay. And I was like, well, yeah, it's not, but it's a Billy Wilder film from like 1956, you know, so we have a lot of conversations about like, you know, because she could very easily just sort of say, burn that film. No one ever needs to see it. Like, it's awful, you know, and
Right.
and to sort of be like, that's I'm not so I have a harder time doing that, you know, like I can definitely recognize politics, gender issues, you know, things from another time and know that it's not okay. Like, I know that it's not okay, but not as much as she does. She really knows what's not okay. You know, I'm laughing at things. She's like, how can you laugh at that? I'm like, oh, yeah, because I was raised to think that was funny.
Yeah, I mean, just even something I was thinking about recently, too, with everything going on. I was thinking about how Mad TV, I was a huge fan of Mad TV, and I would laugh at Miss Swan. Like, my brother and I, we would always pretend we were like Miss Swan. Like, that was like funny to us. And now as a full adult, I'm like, oh my God, that's horrible. And me being an Asian person, Asian woman, no less, and like laughing at that, like what was going, but I do appreciate those moments because it's like we were talking about earlier, it's a huge learning experience. It's like, well, why did I think that was funny? And like, at what point did I grow to realize, oh, that was maybe some like internalized racism that I was dealing with, or what was that? But I think there is, like, I don't think we should burn down all like sketches of Miss Swan and Mad TV, because I think it serves as a good like cultural point of like, this is what we thought was okay back then, but why did we even think that in the first place? And let's dig deeper into that why. And you learn to be a more empathetic person when you make mistakes like that.
Yeah. So. I mean, like, you know, presenting things with context. I was like, you know, when HBO Max took Gone with the Wind off, and I was like telling people, like, my great uncle directed that movie, and I fully support them taking the movie off the platform, because I'm not sitting here saying Gone with the Wind should be like erased, but it needs to be presented with context. It shouldn't be something that like a 7-year-old who's on HBO Max just like turns on and watches and thinks, oh, like the treatment of the black people in this movie is okay, because no one's saying it's not, right? Like, that's the film without context is arguably dangerous. Doesn't mean we should never show the movie again, because then why look at probably any art made before? The Vatican was built by slaves, you know. I mean, it's like, at some point, like, of course, like everything is like problematic, but that's why we give it context. Should we have Confederate monuments? No, that's not the same thing. You know what I mean? And like, and for someone to say, well, the movie of Gone with the Wind is like a monument to the Confederacy, it's like, well, no, it's a story that was told for a reason. Do we want to look at the reasons? We should. Do we want to look at the filmmaking and the performance? Like, there's other things, the costumes, even, like, there's other things to look at and appreciate, but it should not just be there for someone to just see on HBO Max as recommended for you, you know, and for a 9-year-old to just watch it. Like, that's what we talk about, because, like, of course that movie doesn't have a rating. It was pre-rating. That movie should be rated R. Right? Yeah. There's plenty of old movies that really should be rated R, because a child shouldn't watch it without someone there to say, hey, in this movie, this woman is treated like this, and that's not okay now. It wasn't okay then, but like, you know, but this movie decided not to give you like any kind of context or whatever, you know, we just have to be responsible.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think that's like a perfect way to close this. I feel like this episode could go on for hours, because
I've talked too much.
I love it. It was so good. I'm like almost tempted to be like, let's do a part 2 and talk about your great uncle. That would be amazing.
He was an extremely problematic person.
Yeah, I mean, if you're down to do a part 2, I would love to do that, because I think this serves as such like a valuable lesson for a lot of, you know, young creatives, because I hear a lot of these issues I mean, mostly on Twitter now that we're stuck at home, but when it was real life too, that was like something young creatives would always talk about, like, you know, how do I know when something is good? How do I fail better? And, you know, just all of these topics were incredible. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of what you're doing and everything that you're about. And if this helps you at all, then it's makes me feel good. And that's what's important to me. So.
Yeah, thank you. And where can people find you?
Oh, God, Twitter.
What's your Twitter handle?
Kevin T. Morales. I don't really do the Facebook, and Twitter's probably the best place. I have an Instagram, but it's private because I don't do it that much, and it's really just a way of having pictures of my kids for my family. Maybe I'll open it up. My kids are like almost all adults now. I guess I just don't really.
That's a whole other topic, but I'm glad you have it private.
Well, I was like not. I don't really think of myself as like promoting myself. I guess my Twitter, it's not like I have that many followers. I don't have like a big platform or anything. Twitter for me is just more like my own, like I tweet at myself most of the time. Most of the time, my filmmaking advice is really things for me to remember. So hopefully people find it useful.
Yeah. And I mean, you just said you don't promote yourself, but is there anything you want people to keep in mind that's coming up for you? Projects? I mean, we talked about Generation Rex and Shadow Vaults. Anything else?
Look for Generation Rex and look for Shadow Vaults, hopefully coming out. I can't say to a theater near you because that's not true. Yeah, hopefully soon.
Are we allowed to know
you can visit their soon? IMDb pages, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. So we don't know which platform yet, so we can't be like,
nope.
All right. Perfect.
Can't say.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you
for coming on Now in Color. Once again, I'm your host, Sandie Chang, and this has been an amazing time in history. Thank you so much.
No problem.